I would like to welcome you to the Observer Research Foundation to listen to this discussion on the 1954 Sino-Indian treaty agreement. And the occasion is that Bhasin Saab new book, latest book on India's landmark agreements. It's been published by Penguin. But of course, he has, I will make some passing references because the scale of what he has contributed to literature is enormous, especially in documentation of relationships with other countries. He retired from the Ministry of External Affairs as director of the historical division, and he had the unique opportunity to look at India's diplomatic documents. So he has produced, a 2-volume study on India-Nepal-China relations, which was expanded to 5 volumes, covering up to 2005. Second contribution was a documentary study of India-Bangladesh relations, and then which also was expanded to 5 volumes covering up to 2002. And then he did a study on the India-Sri Lanka relations, but his monumental study in November 2012, he published a 10-volume documentary study on India-Pakistan relations running into 10,000 pages. And then he has, of course, done remarkable work on India-China relations. How many volumes is that? 5 volumes. India-China relations. And separately, he has written books on Nepal, China, and Tibet. India, China, and Tibet. And of course, this book on the landmark agreements of India. So he's absolutely thorough with the Sino-Indian relations and India's relations with other South Asian countries. But today, what we have done is that we have decided that we will discuss the 1954 Sino-Indian agreement, which was in itself a kind of a landmark. Landmark for good reasons and for bad reasons. This was the first agreement through which India agreed to accept Tibet as a part of China. Unfortunately, we did not pin down the Chinese to accepting the Tibet-India border, which I think to our eternal regret. But that agreement, I think, lapsed after some time, and right now everything is open, meaning that our border with China remains unsettled. It's a line of actual control over which there is contention and differences, and efforts to resolve it have not been particularly successful. We've had 22, 23 rounds of special representative talks. These special representatives were meant to resolve this border in quick time. This was a decision taken when Prime Minister Vajpayee visited Beijing 2003. And I was in that visit, and I recall asking the Prime Minister's, the National Security Advisor, Mr. Brajesh Mishra, subsequently, that my impression was that you intended to settle this border very quickly. And Mr. Mishra said, yes, we had hoped to do it after 3 or 4 rounds. But somehow that hasn't happened. We are down to 23 rounds. Nothing has happened. Everything is, from whatever my conversation with the various national security advisors, everything is ready. It needs that political push. And that political push right now is not so much from the Indian side, but from the Chinese side. The Chinese find it very convenient to have a border which is not properly demarcated. They're able to utilize it to put pressure on India at various points in time. Let us see what will be the consequences of their last effort to do the same, which was in 2020. But in any case, let us now discuss this 1954 agreement. So I have Dr. Bhasin to talk to us on that. Dr. Bhasin.
Good afternoon. Dr. Manoj, Joshi, and friends. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to ORF and Mr. Joshi for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about my latest book, Negotiating India's Landmark Agreements. The book discusses 5 agreements which, in my opinion, left either benign or baleful impact on the future relations of the signatories. These are India-China Agreement on Tibet, 1954, Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation, 1971, Shimla Agreement, 1972, India-Sri Lanka Accord, 1987, and India-US Civil Nuclear Energy Agreement, 2008. Today, I will use this opportunity to discuss the first agreement on Tibet, which was also the first significant agreement that India signed after independence. It was an agreement between India and China to promote trade and pilgrimage. But it left a very long-term impact on their relations. Chinese had signed this agreement after they had signed a 17-point agreement with Tibet, making it part of China. India not only, without due diligence, had in 1952 accepted China's suggestion to convert the representative office in Lhasa into a consulate, and reciprocally, China set up its own consulate in Bombay. These developments had already impacted sufficiently India's position in Tibet. The 1954 agreement, however, left much greater impact on India's relation with Tibet than any done in the past. After 70-point agreement Beijing had been signed, India's contacts with Tibet thereafter ceased practically because China insisted that any contact with Tibetan official must come through the Chinese Foreign Bureau, which had been set up in Tibet. Since Young Aspen's expedition in 1904, the British had been treating China as a suzerain power of Tibet. And in the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, had undertaken to deal with Tibet only through China. Taking advantage of 1911 revolution, the British took a different position and warned China that HMG would not tolerate any attempt to reduce Tibet into a client state which had independent treaty relation with Great Britain as a coterminous state. British also saw this as an opportunity to eliminate China's influence in Tibet and used it instead as a buffer between itself and China. In a memorandum of 1912, the British conveyed to China that they would not tolerate any attempt to reduce Tibet into a province of China which had independent treaty relation with Great Britain, and underlined the need for a fresh treaty to define the relation between the three of them. China questioned the need for a fresh treaty but were forced to join in the conference in Simla along with Tibet. Since Tibet was to join in the conference as an independent country and participate in the negotiation at par with China and British, its enthusiasm for the conference was understandable. If China was eliminated and Tibet unable to have direct relations with British, who it thought would be more benign than China, and it would also relieve them of the Chinese influence, which was overbearing. The Shimla Agreement had given Tibet much relief, notwithstanding it was placed under Chinese sovereignty in Article 2, which of course ensuring Tibet's autonomy and internal administration and non-interference in the selection of the Lama. That it was a contradictory position did not bother the British, since as the most powerful entity then, they were routinely used to taking contradictory position to suit their interest and convenience. Those were the days when there was no Asian country to question their decisions. But China, showing some courage, at the end did not sign the convention and had even withdrawn its initials, which it had earlier appended. Its main objection was to the Article 9, which sought to define Tibet's boundary with India and China. It is important to note China had formally conveyed to London before the final session of the conference that it would not sign the convention. Accordingly, London had instructed Henry Macmahon, the head of the British delegation to the conference, that given the Chinese reluctance to sign, negotiations should definitely be terminated by Sir Henry. Since there was delay in the dispatch of final instructions from London, the convention had been signed in India. China not signing the convention, a notation was added at the end of the convention, which read, whereas the Simla Convention, after having been initiated by the Chinese plenipotentiary, was not signed or ratified by the Chinese government, it was accepted as binding by the other two parties and between themselves. Later efforts by British to get China sign the convention also failed. The Chinese in no way bound themselves by this agreement then or later. The British officials in India, perhaps in view of the earlier HMG instructions not to sign the agreement, did not think it appropriate either to print it in the official publication or to implement it. The result was the area south of the Macmahon line, which Tibet had ceded to India, was not occupied by the British, and it continued under Tibetan occupation, and the people continued to believe it to be Tibetan territory. It was not until 1937 that the British realized that the Shimla Agreement had neither been printed in the official compilation nor had Tuan ceded under the agreement being occupied. The Assam governor, responsible for the administration of Northeast Frontier area, expressed his apprehensions what could possibly happen in the future. Writing to the government of India, he said, Tuan up to 1940 was undoubtedly Tibetan when it was ceded to India, but that though undoubtedly British, it has been controlled by Tibet, and none of the inhabitants have any idea that they are not Tibetan subjects. He was therefore worried that, quote, the continued exercise of jurisdiction by Tibet in Taiwan might enable China, or still worse, any other power which may in future be in a position to assert authority in Tibet to claim prescriptive rights over a part of the territory recognized as within India by the 1940 Convention. As a first step, it was decided to study the ground situation. In a half-hearted move, an expedition under Captain Lightfoot was sent to Tuan, but he was instructed to be careful not to give any impression to the local government that the matter could be reopened. The Tibetan government protested to the British government at Lightfoot's presence in Tuan and asked for his withdrawal. Finally, it was the acting governor of Assam, Kalinam, had the last word when he said, since Tuan had remained in Tibetan possession since 1914 in equity and international law, and also ethnographically, politically, religiously. It was allowed to remain in Tibet by the modification of the Macmillan line. It was this recommendation which was approved both by the Secretary of State, Liu Emery, and Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. This decision was conveyed to Lhasa by the political officer Basil Gold. Having conveyed that decision, neither the agreement nor the map attached to Article 9 were formally amended. It was this contradictory situation that India inherited in August 1947. Whatever its status, the Macmillan line was not a scientifically drawn line after surveys as confirmed by Macmillan himself later at a lecture in London. Also, at the time of concluding the agreement, Macmillan had not ruled out the possibility of amending the boundary later in the light of further information become available to either party. China, however, in the years following the similar agreement, continued to make some sort of vague claims on Tibet. The British too remained worried at Chinese claim and therefore ensured nothing was done that would give China cause for concern. As for instance, locating a Tibetan representative office in India or even in Sikkim was not agreed since it was felt that it would inevitably breed Chinese suspicion of HMG's motives. On August 7, 1947, a few days before the British demitted power, its representative in Lhasa, Richardson, had messaged New Delhi that he understood that Tibet had agreed to abide by the Simla Convention and trade regulation for the present vis-a-vis government of India, and that the Tibetan government would like to discuss this question of borders with the government of India later. Later, in its formal message, Lhasa did not mention that it would abide by the Simla Convention. Following this, Tibetan government on 16 October 1947, in the letter addressed to British High Commissioner in New Delhi, reminded it of its request for the return of all Tibetan territories gradually included in India. On the same day, the Tibetan government addressed a letter to the Prime Minister Nehru asking for return of those territories, with Darjeeling, Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, and many more, which had in the past been included in India by the British. India decided to ignore the letter. Later, however, in 1959, Nehru had told Zhou Enlai that if India had considered Tibetan demand, India's border would have come down to the Ganga. Nehru himself was not unaware of Tibet's fragile political status and China's non-recognition of Macmillan line. Notwithstanding this background, in November 1950, Nehru had declared in Parliament that Macmillan line is our boundary and that is our boundary, map or no map. We will stand by this boundary and we will not allow anybody to cross this boundary. Paradoxically, when the statement was made, Tuang was still under Tibetan occupation. It was also contrary to his own statement of 30th December 1949, which he had made at the meeting of the senior officials of the Ministry of External Affairs, that China had never accepted the provisions of the 1940 Convention, which created doubts about the Indian boundary with Tibet. After the British withdrawal, Kuomintang, China had told the Indian ambassador K.P. Menon that China had not recognized the Simla Convention and added that China would like to approach India with a view to the abrogation or modification of the agreements which were entered into between China and Great Britain in the days of the unequal treaties. At as the Communist Party occupied Tibet in 1950, and India pleaded for Tibetan autonomy, China warned India that Tibet was an internal affair and it would not tolerate any interference. Just as India had also accepted the Dalai Lama's request for asylum and even conveyed its acceptance to Lhasa when Chinese warned India that asylum to Dalai Lama would put India-China relations under dark clouds. New Delhi dropped hints in Lhasa that it would be advisable for the Dalai Lama to stay on in Tibet itself to give leadership to his people. Dalai Lama, taking the hint, did not attempt to come to India. As pointed out above, Tuang was in Tibetan occupation, and in July 1948, India had informed it that it would adjust the maximum line in Tibet's favor in Tuang area. As China and Tibet were about to sign the 17-point agreement in May 1951, India, fearing the Chinese occupation of Tibet would bring its border to the plains of Assam, hurriedly occupied Tuang in April 1951. A month before the signing of the 17-point agreement, and renamed the area Northeast Frontier Agency. It was for the first time in history, India and China came face to face in Tibet. At this time, India had two regular trade agencies in Tibet, besides the seasonal one. It had its representative office in Lhasa, though its official status was uncertain. It ran hospitals, operated post and telegraph offices and lines, and rest and guest houses. It too maintained a military escort at Gyansi. Ambassador Panikar and political officer in Gangtok, Reshwar Dyal, had warned New Delhi that China could revive its claim on Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and also denounce the Macmillan line. Dyal had even cautioned New Delhi that occupation of Tibet by a potentially hostile and possibly aggressive communist power should be a threat to the security of India. He insisted India's interest in Tibetan autonomy was essentially for its own security. Once China established itself in Lhasa, it made India's position uncertain. As pointed earlier, to start with, it had made India convert its representative office in Lhasa into a consulate. India did not realize that it was a fundamental change and not a mere change in nomenclature. It meant a formal recognition of Tibet as part of China, though it was not said in so many words. Nehru had also ruled out Dyal's suggestion to hold Chumbi Valley and leverage it for Tibet. If India could not give the necessary support, this might, in fact, give the communists an excuse to occupy Tibet. For independent India, the partners of similar agreement lay in the Macmillan line, whatever its legal status. Nehru had already declared Macmillan line is our border, map or no map. China, now in full command in Tibet, made the life of Indian traders, Indian trade agencies, and consulate in Tibet difficult. It would confiscate dark bags from Indian couriers and open them also before returning, and that too after protest from Indian authorities. It may be added that the Indian establishment in Tibet did not enjoy any diplomatic status, and therefore to deal with them was a simple affair. There were problems in hiring transport and even fodder for the animals maintained by India. Two Indian wireless operators working for the Indian agencies were arrested and not released despite protected correspondence and several representations. The matter came to a head when a fresh army detachment arrived to relieve the earlier one as per past practices. The Chinese would not allow the earlier detachment to leave and asked India to withdraw entire military establishment completely. India was now worried about the acceptance of the maximum line as the boundary between India and Tibet. This communist China had in their common minimum program in Article 55, said, which was their constitution at that time, said it shall examine the treaties and agreements concluded between India and between government and foreign governments and shall recognize, abrogate, revise, or renegotiate them according to their respective contents. Otherwise, also, Chinese officials had made it known to the Indian officials in Lhasa that the old facilities of treaties were no longer in existence. Nehru was keen that nothing was done on the Indian side which might vitiate the atmosphere for the settlement of the pending issues. Since the Chinese were creating problems in the functioning of the Indian establishments, on 1st September 1953, Nehru had, in a letter to Zhou Enlai, proposed discussion to settle all the outstanding problems. In so doing, he drew his attention to the Indian note of 2 August 1952, which had listed 7 issues needing settlement in Tibet. All the 7 issues dealt with trade agencies or pilgrimage. Border question was not one of them. After Zhu had conveyed his agreement for talks, the brief that was prepared for the talks had instructed the Indian delegation not to discuss the border question. Should China insist on discussion to break the negotiation, though the Ministry of External Affairs had recognized that the question of frontiers was obviously important. This was notwithstanding the legal advice received by the ministry that since China had not ratified the Shimla Agreement, it could refuse to stand by the Aksai chain in the western sector and Tuang in the eastern sector, which were listed among the disputed areas. Delhi remained extra cautious that no mention of frontier was made even by any innocuous or incidental reference. Even the formulation that happily there was no territorial dispute between India and China was ruled out because of fear it might provoke China to bring up the border question. It should be noted in parentheses that Nehru had instructed Ambassador Panikar at the time of his appointment that he should avoid discussion of boundary question with China since India was sure about its boundary with Tibet. And as such, any opening of on this account would give China the impression that India had doubts about its boundary. In the entire discussion, which lasted as long as 4 months, the border question did not come up. The discussion was tedious, time-consuming, which were undertaken perhaps to tire down the Indians. The Chinese priority in any case appeared to be to throw India out of Tibet, and they eminently succeeded in that. After the agreement had been signed, the Chinese made the functioning of the Indian establishment almost impossible, that they had to be shut soon after. Nehru, smitten by Chinese friendship and the Panchshil had declared the agreement a great achievement and even declared that all outstanding issues, including the boundary, had been settled, even it was not even mentioned. Nehru failed to understand that well-defined failed to understand that well-defined mutually agreed borders are important for good relations between neighbors, and they come into being as a result of agreements between stakeholders by adjustment of rival claims, interests, and ambitions at find their giants. Chinese, in their talk, had proposed five principles as a basis to settlement of all land issues, which India accepted and even called the agreement enthusiastically as Panchsheel Agreement. Obsessed by Panchsheel, he asked the ambassador in Rangoon, K.K. Chatur, to commend it to the Burmese Prime Minister in his relation with China. Since the full details of the negotiation and climb down that India had made remained hidden from the public, and they welcomed the agreement. Even the press, with its limited reach then, had to welcome it by and large. T.N. Cole, who was one of the negotiators, in his report to the Prime Minister on the negotiation, justified the time taken and the result achieved. He had even suggested a non-aggression pact with China, which Nehru did not agree. It was the report of another negotiator, Dr. Gopalachari, which was trigger for Nehru's decision to draw the line in the western sector between Ladakh and Cochin, where the border was shown undefined in the Survey of India maps issued before independence. He also had said that the line so drawn would be the border which would not be open for discussion. It was this uncharacteristic decision of the Prime Minister that led to the all problems between India and China, including the 1962 war. Finally, I would say that China did not even care for India's sensitivities, and India was not troubled. India suggested inclusion of two passes, Ruang and Udok, which linked Ladakh and Tibet to facilitate trade and pilgrimage between them. The Chinese flatly refused even to consider it on the plea that Ladakh, being part of Jammu and Kashmir, was a disputed area and China did not want to get involved in it. Indian argument that it was the question of India's territorial integrity. China's reaction was that if India insisted, there would be deadlock and no agreement at all. So much for the Chinese friendship. I think I have said enough and would like to stop here.
Thank you, Bhasin Saab. I think you have brought out the entire picture as to what led up to the 1954 agreement and the structural weaknesses of that agreement, meaning in the sense that India virtually conceded in advance, or whatever it is, I would say India's tactics in going into the agreement were extremely faulty. And those faulty tactics eventually led to the war in 1962 and a problem which has yet to be resolved, meaning it is the Sino-Indian border problem has yet to be resolved. And of course, as I pointed out earlier, the 54 agreement lapsed in
1962.
1962. Well, the war came. That was the end of that
Even
agreement.
just before that, it had 8-year life.
Yeah,
So therefore, in April 62,
yeah, it lapsed. So it lapsed at that point, but we got virtually nothing out of it. But the Chinese gained a great deal. All Indian establishments in Tibet had to be removed. The status of India's status in Tibet was changed without us gaining anything. So I think what we'll do now is that I will throw open the issue to the floor, and we can have a discussion on this. But before that, I would like to ask you a question. Uh, who exactly were the advisors? Was it Nehru himself, or were there some key advisors on whose advice he had acted to accept this agreement?
Sir, as far as the advisor is concerned, I think Nehru was mostly acting on his own. As for instance, when a telegram came from Beijing about the conversion of the representative office in Lhasa into a what you call a consulate, he immediately shot off a reply without consulting anybody, without due diligence. He said, yes, we can do it. And the ambassador conveyed it to Chinese also. So, as per telegram, there was no consultation. Within minutes, he had replied because he used to get all the telegram as Prime Minister, and he used to reply also directly. I have not seen any record of any cabinet meeting making decisions on important issues. For instance, he wrote to B.P. Kural in 1962 in a letter, and he used to write his own letters, not asking for drafts, that with the talks that are going to take place with Zhou Enlai in 1960, there will be no agreement. Now, there's no record of any cabinet deciding that. He had said it on his own.
Okay, now I'm opening it up to the audience for questions.
Good evening, sir. My name is Saurabh Kumar. I am undergraduate student of University of Delhi. I just want to relate India-China agreement of 1954 with respect to today context in the geopolitics. In 2024, China celebrated 70th anniversary of the 1954 agreement with the theme of from the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence to building a community with a shared future for mankind. The thing that concerns me the most is that they have used the term mankind, shared future for mankind. What the kind of foreign policy, as we all know that China pursue is altogether different from the mankind. They want to occupy the territory of other country. Like we have example of Belt and Road Initiative that China follow. We have example of Hambantota port of Sri Lanka that has been transferred to China for next 99 years. So it is very contradictory. What is on the paper, what the China follow. So what is your remarks on this? And also, China-Pakistan economic corridor is something which is threat to India's sovereignty. And India, as of now, India has not able to assert much more on this. So, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I will only say it was China's problem because China was the one, India was settled in Tibet. It had all the privileges, everything. And China had just come, 1950 they occupied it. 1951 they had this India 17-point agreement. And so they were the one who really wanted to throw India out. It was their problem, not India's. Problem was to stay on. But India did not make any attempt to stay on.
Good evening, sir. I am Colonel Vidur Sharma. I am a research fellow with the ORF. Sir. I restrict my question to the topic per se. As Dr. Joshi was just mentioning about it, that by this 1954 agreement, China was able to achieve 3 concrete results. One is that, as he has mentioned, that the complete surrender of Indian interest in Tibet. Second is that I'll say that open declaration of the Tibetan subjugation by China as an internal matter, so that China become part of, Tibet become part of China. And third, by this Panchsheel Treaty, because of the various articles of the treaty, non-interference in any future Tibetan affair, or I'll say the Tibetan fighting for independence at a later stage. So all 3 things we accepted. Now, is there anything in your records somewhere where what was the Indian, I'll say, side's view that what India got from this treaty? I'm sure when you sign a treaty, it's a give and take sort of thing. At least something would have been. So, what were the Indian gain? Because in open domain, whatever we study, we didn't find anything what India got. Was there anything like that in any way? That is my first question, sir. And the second question is with respect to in a scenario where let's say that China has now gone back on Panchsheel and whatever is happening nowadays. Now, if you see all along the border, let's talk about the Tawang first, what you were mentioning about it. The population of Tawang are mainly the Mompas. Mompas. Now, Mompas are the original inhabitant of Western Arunachal and Bhutan. The largest chunk of Mompas are either in India or in Bhutan. A very few tinkling is there inside the Tibet. So when we say ethnically, maybe religiously, they may be, you can say, connected to the Tibet. But why India is so, if not today, at least at that point of time, so wary about it that the China may find its claim on Tibet, because ethnically, they are not Tibetan. In fact, like the Khampas, who are the original or who are the inhabitants of the Kham region of Tibet, majority of the Khampas are in China, and there are very sprinkling of Khampas all along the border. So if you see the ethnic population in Arunachal Pradesh anywhere, it is nowhere connecting that any of the tribe of Arunachal Pradesh or any tribe of the significance in Arunachal Pradesh is belonging to Tibet. So that is the issue with respect to. So I don't know why we are so much worried about it. So was there any consideration, discussion on such issue that why we were so wary about that China may take the Tawang?
As was India's gain from the agreement, people were not aware because nothing was available in the open sources. Whatever people were told was it.
But with your being in that position, when you've been there, you must have gone through some.
No, this is exactly what I'm saying. No? People, newspaper, look at the editorials of the newspaper. Except, I think, one paper, all other papers were in praise of it. And even Times of India said that by this agreement, border problem has been settled. So, the people not being aware what was, media has no reach, unlike today when there's internet, everything. At that time, whatever government dished out, that was media information.
So you are not able to access any government documents?
I have not been able to see any document whereby personal or private opinion. Newspaper were the carrier of opinion. And as far as newspaper were concerned, most papers were in praise of the agreement. That a great thing has been. As I said, even Times of India wrote that border problem has been solved. Because that is what the government said. Nehru had said, by this agreement, the border problem has been solved. Though it was not even mentioned.
Any newspaper highlighted what India's achievement? I'm just saying when they were praising.
That is what he had highlighted. Not that we have achieved the border agreement, we have Panchsheel is a great thing, we will have peaceful relations and a good neighbor and all that. As for ethnic questions you have raised, naturally we were worried that when the Chinese are occupation of Tibet, their influence can spill over into the bordering areas, because all these were, though not of the same stock, but similar stock. And Tibetan was spoken all over. So therefore, there was a worry that Chinese occupation will impact the security in the region. Even Arishwar, they all had pointed out that Tibet's autonomy is for India's own security. But it was all ignored.
Sir, I'm Colonel Vivek Murthy. I'm a senior research fellow with Center for Contemporary China Studies. So we deliberated enough on McMahon line, enough, sir. But if you would throw some light on rest of India-Tibet boundary. I'll not call India-China boundary, India-Tibet boundary. The western sector, middle sector, Sikkim, Tibet, Bhutan, and Tibet, Nepal.
Well, as far as the boundary concerned, everybody knows what it is. It's a problem area. We say this is our boundary, they say this is our boundary. There's no settlement as such. So what can one say about the border? We are in occupation of certain area called Tawang. It is not demarcated, it is not delineated. Similarly, Excision, not delineated, not demarcated. So when I repeatedly said to Nehru, as modern nations, our borders are not scientifically surveyed. Therefore, there is a need to survey these borders and demarcate them so that there is a peace. Nehru said, what is the need? We know where our borders are by custom and usage. And custom and uses were not the demarcating points. It was good in 17th, 18th century, but not in second part of the 20th century when tools for survey were available. It was Nehru was adamant that no need for any surveys. And then every subsequent government took the same position. Even today, that is our position.
So what was the status of the western sector as far as the Simla conference was concerned, 1914? While
See, it was no man area. No man's area. But the Chinese occupied Tibet in 1950. They came as this route. And they told her that we have been using this area since 1950. And we were not there. They constructed the road and we were not aware. We came to know about the road in 1957 when Chinese announced the completion of the road. And the note that we gave to the Chinese, first of all, it was not a protest note. It was headline informal note. Informal note means just by the way.
I'm Sanjeet, PhD candidate from JNU. So my question is that when we talk of unilaterally giving up our prerogative with regard to the 1954 treaty, have we considered the issue of logistical and military feasibility of defending those privileges? Was it even possible if we had not made this agreement?
I've not understood.
You'll have to speak louder because
So basically, the question is that when we say that we had given up whatever privilege we had in Tibet, is it even militarily and logistically possible to defend those privileges if China had sort of asserted its control back in 1954?
Can I explain? I explain the question. So what he is saying that we did surrender our interest in Tibet during that point of time. Suppose we wouldn't have surrendered. Were we in a position to protect our interest in case our people are there in Tibet and China tries to attack them?
Well, there would have been war. As simple as that.
No, he's saying logistically, was it possible, easier for us or easier for China?
Logistically, we would improve some communications. As with time, communication has improved all over. Even the small villages have better communication.
I think you have to understand
We were at
that the first road connecting Srinagar with Leh came up in 1965. So the logistics we're talking about. So in the 50s, the logistics were completely, especially in the northeast. They were worse in the northeast.
We were using animals for carrying our diplomat or dock bags. And people were also traveling by the mules. All goods were being sent to
I think, sir, except this Aksai Chin road which came up later. Before that, the connectivity to Tibet was much better from Indian side than the Chinese side. Because Kham region was totally disconnected. There was no road, sense of any road that side. Whatever connectivity was through this Xinjiang route only. But that too, it was not a proper road. Before the Chinese made it a proper road in 1952 to 57.
No, that
So
depends.
if we say
over the Qinghai Plateau, there was a route. There was a route from Chengdu also, but they also had mule routes and similar kind of routes. But the easiest access was via Xinjiang and the Aksai Chin. But that was mainly to Western.
via Sikkim.
That is mainly, yes, sorry. But that is Tibet.
He's talking about Tibet only. Surrender.
Oh, only Tibet. Yeah, with Tibet, this thing, but China had other routes into Tibet. Ours was this thing, and you had all the routes to Mansarovar from Uttarakhand, basically for pilgrimage usage.
So I am Ajay Kumar from University of Delhi. So like T.N. Cowell in a report about the 1954 agreement has mentioned that we had to take up effective control of the frontiers effectively, but why was it never followed afterwards?
Can you repeat?
T.N. Cowell in 1954 on a report about the 1954 agreement had mentioned that we have to take up the effective control of frontiers immediately. So why was it never followed afterwards?
T.N. Call.
You see, Cole, as in his report, said so many things, but he never mentioned in his report after the travel. He came back from Beijing that we have to improve communication, we have to do that. And this. He was only justifying that delay that had taken place. And also make a suggestion that we should have a sort of this is no war agreement and all. But there was no, what did he know of the logistics? He had been posted in China, of course, and he had come back to Delhi, and soon after he was sent for these talks. But he had never been to Tibet. I don't think any officer had been to Tibet except those who were posted there.
Our representative in Lhasa, Mr. Sinha, he had apparently made a reference that the Chinese never actually used the Aksai Chin road for the occupation of Tibet, meaning that road came up later. So that their pretext, so the use of that, the claim that that road was important for them is not really accurate.
No, see, you were talking of second road in 1950, when the Chinese occupied Tibet. They used this route. And as far as there was no communication is a fact, because Nehru said not a blade of grass grows there. So there was no population. Nehru himself in a note said to China in 1959 that since there was no population, we thought nobody will occupy it, so we didn't also occupy it. So what do you say to such a policy which only on the basis of certain presumption is formulated?
One of the questions I'm quite interested is when Tibetans signed the 17-point agreement with Beijing, what was India's stand on that? And second thing I just want to mention about the logistic thing that we are talking about, I think we are negating the air power that we had. We were recognizing the Tibetan areas even before 62. And the Chinese had very weak air power at that point of time. So if there would have been a need to really, not sign this agreement and take the control on Tibet, our air power could have done that. Yeah. Thanks.
Any election was accepting. India could do the thing. What could India do? The Tibetan delegation never contacted the Indian embassy when they were there. And they probably did not allow them. They had given them an agreement, sign it. If you don't want to sign it, you can go back. So India could not influence anything. They were just informed of the agreement. This agreement has taken place as announced on the radio. So even the Dalai Lama heard it on the radio first. And his reaction was, of course, very unfortunate. And he was very sad. But it took a lot of time for the Tibetan to accept it. It was signed in 29th April, 1954. But his first okay went to Lhasa, to Beijing in October. But they were mulling for all this time what should be their reaction. But then they found they can do nothing. The Chinese forces were already in Tibet. After 1950 occupation, they had occupied Tibet. And they had no army. They said, your army will not be there. You can join our army, but no separate Tibetan army. So Tibet was helpless.
I'm a researcher at ORF, and my question to you is, there is a feeling in India that we are being betrayed by China, that it launched the 1962 war. My question is, what was the basis of our optimism towards China? Why were we so optimistic about China? Were we misreading them, or we were helpless? We knew that they had bad intentions, but we couldn't do as much. Thank you.
Indo-China bye-bye is the answer. Until 1959, we were shouting Indo-China bye-bye. And everybody thought our relations are best. Nowhere in parliamentary debate Nehru said there's a problem with China. He always said Golmaal. So we were under the impression that our relations are very good. And Nehru said in parliament in 1959, I'm sorry, I kept the people unaware of what was happening. I thought the problem will be sorted out without excitement. This is his statement in parliament. So if you have all this aura bye-bye, what can you do? You can be only optimistic. In 1957, 56, 57, when Chomai came, people, thousands and thousands of people were standing on the roadside, shouting Indo-China bye-bye and Chomai Zindabad.
When I was a little boy, 6 years old, I think, 56? Yes.
56 December.
Yeah, so I was 6 years old. We lived next to the Mumbai airport. And I was one of those people who was waving that flag. At that thing, I still, in my mind's eye, I can still see Zhao Enlai standing in the car and waving to people on either side.
There were millions of people thinking like you.
Yeah, but I was 6. I mean, Nehru had...
You are yet not become expert on Tibet and China.
So, yeah, I'm going to take 2 questions now together.
See, I come from Kumaon region, Uttarakhand. I also belong to a community which had trading links with the Tibetans. And this trading link was very much alive and kicking till as late as 1957. We had trading points across the border, across Lipu Lake, Gartok. These are all trading agencies were established there. And our people used to go and go to Tibet, take the things from here and bring the things from there till late about 1956-57. So on ground, the trade was going on between Tibet and India in a very vigorous manner. It was not that one person was going, no. Entire community and villages used to go. I think Manoj would know a little bit about it. He may also not know much about it because I come from the real border area of, Tibet. And we had trading links with the Tibet. But listening to you, I find that as if, there's a big discordant note between what was obtaining in the ground in terms of trade between Tibet and India by people like us. And it was not only in Uttarakhand, it was across Himachal, it was across, Sikkim, it was across all along the border till the China attacked the Tibet or took over physically. But there on the ground, we are having very good trade. But at the level, at the policy level or the leadership level, we feel that there is no contact.
In
Nothing happening.
1957
So
or
how do you
1950
explain these kind of things? I find it very difficult to understand, frankly speaking. Otherwise, normally I don't speak. But here I find a very serious discordant. What you are saying, what was obtaining on the ground.
See, 1957 or 58, my memory is not serving me. There was a report in the confidential sort of thing of the Economist. And the ambassador in America, he pointed out to Foreign Secretary about this report and said, what is the position? I am a little worried. Foreign Secretary Sri Maldat replied, there's nothing to be worried, everything is okay, Chinese have agreed to sort out the matter and everything will be sorted out. So, Foreign Secretary until 1957, and this is a report coming from confidential part of the Economist. And he saw it in America and he wrote. Here nobody had taken note of it.
I think only in January of 1959 was the first time when Zhou Enlai wrote to Nehru that the entire border between us is disputed, which was a shock to, because they never, the Nehru stand was that the border is already okay, there's no problem. That's the point that Mr. Bhasin is making about the 1954 agreement. That in 1954 agreement, I think the points that Mr. Bhasin made was that the Indian side made it, was very careful not to even raise the border issue. The whole point was that the Nehru told them that don't even talk about the border issue with the Chinese because border is already settled. So in 1959, when Zhou Enlai finally wrote to Nehru, saying that actually, our entire border is disputed, and that is and of course I think Kundan, the point that you made, the Chinese did not consolidate themselves along the entire Tibet area till after 1959, because after the rebellion broke out in Lhasa, you see, till then, particularly our area, meaning our Uttarakhand area and all that, the Chinese were not interested in that. For them, the important part was the Daulat Beg Oldi and that part in the north and the Aksai Chin area. So the Chinese were not there physically. They were not there physically. There may have been a couple of them around, but not. That was not an important area. There were no significant claims except the Mana, what is that? That claim in Uttarakhand? Barahuti, yeah, except Barahuti. In this border, there was not much of an issue. And the Tibet, the Mansarovar journey was going on fairly regularly. But now, just a minute. Now,
before he had on the 1954 agreement, Ministry of External Affairs sent a telegram to the delegation that please include 3 passes in the western sector. The reply from the ambassador immediately came. These 3 passes are in the disputed area, and any mention of them will inevitably lead to the border question. Please tell us whether we should raise it or not. And the reply was, don't raise it, don't bother, no need to include the 3 passes. This was the extent of the negligence, you can say here, but I don't know if there's any better word I can say.
I'm Abhishek Yadav, University of Delhi, student of University of Delhi. I have a question that, is there any way or a solution to solve this border dispute? And the second question is, where the place where we are lagging behind since 1954 to 2020 Kalwan crisis? I
don't think so. Because we will not going to give up our Macmillan area, and they are not going to give up. It is already 60, 70 years when this situation prevails. And I think over the years, by default, this will become a permanent border. Not recognized by either, but chalta rahega. Because there is no solution.
But it will be militarized border. It will be a militarized border.
Militarized border, yes. But it will by default become almost permanent over the years.
So there is no...
I don't see any possibility of any settlement. After, can you give up formally in writing Aksai Chin? Can we give up our claim, our possession of Macmillan area, Tuang, or Arunachal Pradesh? They are citizens of India. So how do you settle the matter? This possibility was there until early 60s, when China were prepared to barter one for the other. At that time, we did not. In 1960, Chou En-lai had made this proposal and we rejected it. And then in 1979, when Bajpayee went, they again repeated it. At that time, by the time Bajpayee came and there was a question in parliament, the government had changed. And Narasimha Rao had become foreign minister. He said, we can agree to the settlement in the eastern sector, where we are possession of the backbone line area, but not here. So China said it's a package deal. So over the years, it is a package deal. Over the years, this has become a status quo. And we have to live with this.
Yeah, group captain.
There were some limitations about use of air power in 62. No sort of training had been carried out to carry out such operations in hilly terrain. There were a lot of range restrictions. The altitude was another problem. Then there was no effective coordination exercises or training between the army and the Air Force in that particular place. So there were chances that our own troops could have been bombed actually. So only the Canberra had that kind of altitude performance and the range to go and attack across the border. And I think at time there was also fear that the Chinese retaliation would be much more heavier if they started using their air power and started attacking maybe Calcutta or whatever like that. So these are all probably holding back. The broad issues were that enough training had not been carried out for that kind of operations, and helicopters and transports were definitely used in the 62 war.
Okay, that of course is not really germane to our particular discussion. So I will ask now Ambassador Stobdan.
Thank you, sir, very much. Very interesting. Obviously, reading your books on the compilations. I thought there's some missing points here. What Manoj said and you said about not having the border settled and 1954 treaty. Right, borders were not settled. If Nehru thought border is settled, it was based on the customary border, customary lines. The problem with the Nehru's formula of border was that the Tibetans were claiming areas, not the Chinese. Tibet was not part of China then, till 51. But they sent 2 telegrams. You are aware about it. I mean, the whole Himalaya was part of Tibet.
I think you had referred to it.
I have referred to that letter of October
I think it was
1947.
it was not India, China per se. It's the Tibetan factor that we are not really considering, and also the US factor. Tibet without United States is not an actor. It's the United States added itself in the 50s to the Tibet issue. So what happened? They claim areas that had started in 47. Then they surrendered to the Chinese in 51 without telling us. Okay. Then the Dalai Lama came here through the CIA. Okay, that we are not considering it is a big problem. So then the 53 we started negotiating for the Panchsheel. And the Panchsheel was not about border, Panchsheel was more about trade and pilgrimage. I think people who have not read properly in many things is that you should go to Uttar Pradesh in the assembly of Uttar Pradesh, the old Uttar Pradesh, where all the assembly debates were about what he was talking about, the trading point. Trading continued till the Tibetan problem started. And that debate in the UP Parliament, UP Assembly was not about Tibet. It was about the Bhutia trade. You know, they were losing money. They were losing a lot of income. So that was the main debate which reflected in the Lok Sabha also. So the Tibet, but suddenly this March 10th, which is coming now very soon, flared up. And the Dalai Lama came here, was received by External Affairs Minister in Arunachal Pradesh, and then subsequently all those things followed up. So it was not just simply, I think, happened in the air. There were backgrounds that we want to overlook that part. the American factor. Nowhere people are only bashing Nehru. But whether Nehru was forced to bring Dalai Lama here or whether he did it by himself, that was a key issue. Why did he come here? He was sent back in 1956. He said, you go and deal with Mao Zedong, don't come to me. But then second time he came, he stayed put. And Nehru didn't even know that CIA was operating from Kalimpong. He said, I don't know about it in the parliament. So the point is, there are some missing points. I don't know where the narrative has gone wrong. Now the CIA informations are coming out. A lot of documents are now coming out how all these things have happened in the 50s and the 60s. So I think the second problem I thought is that the McMahon line, even today, as of 7 March, the Tibetans still wants to revoke it. That's the entire problem. It was signed in 1914. That particular date, they regretted it. One Shastra fellow who signed it, Chinese walked out.
You are right on that.
Yeah. Chinese walked out, the Tibetans signed it. Second day onwards, they said, oh, this is the biggest blunder. How to get it cancelled? So they worked with the British, they worked with the Americans, they are still working with us to get it nullified. Nehru has been bluffing, said, no, this is not possible. The Tibetan argument is that he signed that Shimla Treaty without consent of the government, Assembly of Tibet. Tibet was independent then. Secondly, he said, since the Chinese have not signed it, why should we sign it? So it's a second thought. Somehow they understood that they can nullify it through the Indians, like these Namaste, Mamaste and all that thing. Even today they are trying, but I think it is impossible to change McMahon line from our point of view. And I think whether the Chinese are behind in the Tibetan policy, I don't know. But the future is not about what the Chinese are doing, what we are doing, what the Americans and the Tibetans will do. And today, I think you saw that article in the Washington Post. Dalai Lama wrote a new article today. And he said, look, I'm fine with the Chinese constitution. Want to have a dignified future. So then whatever we are talking has no meaning. They are okay with what the Chinese are doing.
You see, as far as the USA is concerned, it was very much interested in 1950. In 1950, the Americans were very much interested in intervening in Tibet against Chinese. But it was the Indian government which refused to give them any leverage. There's ample record about it. For instance, 1950 or 51, I think, the Tibetan representative in Delhi, he had come to Delhi to talk to the Americans. And Americans said, okay, we will check with Washington and let you know. And Washington said, yes, we are willing to give arms, provided India is also agreeable to carry the arms to it. But we were not willing to. We told them nothing doing. Border trade, it goes on at the border. It is not that these were imports or exports were going on large scale. Border trade always goes on because local needs are fulfilled only through border trade. Dalai Lama in 1951 came on his own. He had no idea when the trouble arose in Beijing. He quietly left. Even Chinese were not aware. And only when he had reached almost 10, 15 kilometers away from the border, he informed India. And then India said, yes, we will give the asylum. And he was received at the border. His entourage was received. And then, there was no... By that time, our relations also had gone bad with the Americans, with the Chinese. And therefore, probably as part of overall policy, we allowed him to come. Or we welcomed him, not allowed, but welcomed him also. And even today, he is guest of the government of India. He is guest of the government of India. We have acquiesced in their so-called Tibetan government in Dharamsala. which we should not have done if we want to have better relations. But these things are high level and these things go on.
Also, with respect to all of your points, sir, I agree. Only I have got one, I'll not say counter view, but I'll say I want to have little difference with respect to the issue of Dalai Lama coming to India in the role of Nehru. Now, you are absolutely right that since beginning Nehru was nowhere interested in Tibet, which is evident from the fact that when the telegram came, he didn't consult anyone and he said, okay, just remove everybody. That Tibet is China. Till 1959, the Nehru was doing the same thing. You are aware of that 57 issue that Dalai Lama came here and the whatever discussion was there, and he insisted that, okay, you go back to China, you discuss with Chow Enlai. I don't want to get into it. But it is not only the CIA, it is also the people of India. Till 59, Nehru was ramming through his policy because of his own will, and that's how this Hindi-Chini bhai was there. But by the time the Chinese atrocities news started coming to India in 59 when the Dalai Lama was coming, the public perception was totally against Nehru. So it is not only the CIA role why the Nehru was forced to take Dalai Lama into India. But it was the public perception also. Finally,
Hysteria was created.
I think there was no way that you could have refused it because he had just come near the border and it could not be refused.
No, I think given your breadth of knowledge and looking at your CV, I was astonished that you're 90 years old now and you performed, out here. I can only hope that some of this will rub off on the rest of us and we can be academically active. Meaning to produce a book, he must have, at the age of 89, and as I said, if you put Bhasin Saab's books together, you will not be able to even get them in two hands like this, if you just put them in a row like that. So I'd like to thank you very much once again, and please give a hand to him.